Hey, what's up everyone? It's been a while here since I put out a video update on GeoPix, and I promise you the project's not dead. It's just been undergoing a bit of house cleaning, so to speak. After the last video I put out several months ago, I realized that the network was getting pretty dense. If you're a touch designer user, you know how this goes. It's gotten very messy, it's gotten very disorganized, and it's become very hard to work and very hard to add features to. This meant that I needed to kind of take a break from the videos and the weekly updates, which might have been a little overzealous in hindsight, and focus on getting the viewport, the core mechanics of the viewport solid. So I basically ripped out all the LED stuff I had in the last place, and I dismantled a lot of what I had viewport wise too, and I kind of had to rebuild it in a much cleaner, much more organized way. I managed to solve the problem actually that's been plaguing me for quite a few, oh man, maybe a couple of years actually. Had to do with optimization in the network. I won't go into it too much, but it's a touch designer thing with like cyclical, data loops. It's sooner or later when you build software, large scale software, touch designer, for some reason this always seems to come up, at least for me. And one aspect of this was something I figured out just a couple weeks ago. I was very happy about that. Also, some big improvements to the UI, not just in the way it looks and the way it's organized, but just the way that it's built in the back end, and it makes it scale a lot better, at least in some areas. I won't go into that too much. Maybe I'll do a video on the technical stuff later, maybe a month or two from now when things are further along. But for now, I just want to show you what's different, what's changed, and what you can kind of expect from the software going forward. So yeah, let's dive into it, and I won't keep you waiting any longer. So as you can see here, we have some flashy new things going on. We have a video texture playing on two pieces of geometry, and we also have some different looking lighting, which is actually the result of these scene lights. Not to be confused, of course, with DMX lights. There will be support for DMX-based fixtures of various types, and that's going to be a whole different thing. These lights, these little yellow slashy icons, they're basically only scene lights. They're meant for, static illumination, setting up lights for seeing your geometry better. Let's say you have a stage or some kind of an area that you want to, have some very dim lights in, but you don't want to have them take over. This is a way for you to see what's going on in the preview, without actually having those lights be connected to your system, which again, that's not built yet, but it will be. So it's basically, part of the suite of features that I want to be kind of viewport tools and viewport functions. So here we have kind of a preview of what the new technology looks like. Fixtures, signal chains, and devices are three devices, or three types of objects you can create that kind of need each other to work in GeoPix. Currently, these aren't hooked up in any meaningful pixel mapping relevant way. They will be, but the structure and the object types and all of their parameters are pretty much built. The way it works is you have a device. You can see it here in the outliner. I'll talk about that in a second. And you have signal chains below that, and then you have fixtures below that. And this is how GeoPix expects everything to be built that has to do with pixel mapping. There has to be these three distinct levels of parenting, and they have to be in this order. And then everything, all the LEDs, all of the pix, as I'm going to call them probably from here on out, will be part of these fixtures, and this device will basically be responsible for those devices. So it's very modular, very self-contained, and very hierarchy based, if that makes sense. So kind of segueing from there, we have this outliner. It looks a lot more colorful. It's also a lot more visual indication of like hierarchy and wires. Again, this is something that I've been wanting to do for a while, and it just hasn't been high on my list. But recently, in this giant cleanup phase I went through, I basically rebuilt the outliner from scratch. And it's now a geometry-based outliner, which hovers in the actual scene. So as you can see here, we have it overlaying on our viewport geometry. And just to kind of show you, you can actually still select stuff on either side of this outliner. So it's very much in the scene with everything else. It's a very fluid part of your viewport. Of course, there's no ability to scroll, but that's coming later. But right now, you can have quite a few objects, and you can have them all fit kind of vertically here. So let's see what other big features to talk about before I kind of go through the changes. I guess also to mention, the UI has had a bit of work as well. You'll notice that these buttons are different from before. I've been hitting tab to switch between create mode and tool mode, and you have, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Tools are things that let you interact with your scene or add or delete stuff, and then create is what you can just create. You know, it's your palette of objects or options, essentially. We have objects, technology, and other with lights. So on the right, we have our attribute editor, which is something we had before, but it's become a little bit, it's become a lot more efficient and robust, but it's also much more scalable from a back-end standpoint. So before, I actually had to go in there and copy-paste stuff and change a bunch of settings every time I wanted one new attribute, and now all I have to do is add that attribute to a table, and it starts showing up in this attribute editor when the selected object has that attribute as well. Again, that's back-end stuff, but it's going to make programming new features and new object types way easier than it was before, way easier. So as you can see here, we have a piece of geometry selected. We have under material, we have some new attributes: red, green, blue texture. A texture is a field, and these are just basically value fields. So you can change the color of, we can't see too much right now because there's lights on this, but if I turn off shaded, which by the way, it just turns it into a bright version of these colors or that texture, you can see that when I tweak these colors, it's actually changing the overall shader color. So very useful, and that's part of any geometry now. And as well as the color, you can change the texture, and as you can guess, that's actually how we got a video texture going on this piece of geometry here. I've also turned shaded off, so if I had it on, you wouldn't see it because there's no light hitting it. But that's basically how that works for now. This is not efficient. This is essentially, this field is for blueprints and schematics and drawings that you want to trace LEDs on top of when you're creating your scene. It's not actually meant for video, although you can throw video in it, as you can see here. The video will come later, attached to things in a more efficient manner, in a more meaningful way, with like the performance aspect of it and, you know, the mapping aspect of it more worked out. And this is just very bare bones, just kind of a texture. Actually, let me go and show you why this is why I put this in here in this style. I need to pull up an image real quick. I have one here ready. This is just a really simple image. Let me go ahead, I'll leave that there. Of like a schematic or some kind of house thing, right? So, well, okay, so we have this thing, and basically what this is for is, you know, let's say you create this plane, it's an image plane, you can go into hull mode over here and go to hull add mode, and then this isn't working yet, by the way, but you'd be able to click and add hulls to your image. And basically that would allow you to bring in a picture of your venue or a picture of something you sketched out, right? If you don't want to do 3D too heavily, you can just bring in an image and you can use that as a basis for your scene and where you lay out your items and your objects. So that's very useful. And that's what it's for. It's really for static images, but you know, if you want to have like a texture for your character and have like a little bit more of a believable scene, you can throw textures on your objects as well. If you're big into 3D, you can make a fully 3D scene in like another piece of software, and you can bring in the textures and the geometry, the OBJs, and you can put it together here. Although I don't plan to have too much support for like, you know, bumps and diffuse and specular. I mean, maybe it's not high on my priority list because that's not really what this is about. This is about the lights, you know, in the end. So anyways, that's that. So let me go ahead and clear everything, and I'll just jump into features. I have about 5 minutes left. I want to try and make this not too long of a video, so I'll probably go through these next few parts a little bit quicker. Okay, so over here on the left we have tools and create. If we're going to go into create mode, by the way, the things are very hotkey driven now. I've been hooking up hotkeys to a lot of different functionality, so you'll see me using those hotkeys, and you can see those hotkeys over here in the top right. So when I left click, hit Control, Shift, you'll see all that over there. So okay, import. You've seen this before. Basically, you can import geometry. They have to be OBJs. Real quick, I'm going to turn on default lighting so you can actually see what's going on. So this works as it did before. You can throw textures and do all your attribute stuff here on that. Oh, let me go and finish up the attribute editor because there's a few new things about that, and then I can just focus on the left bar. When you type in settings, or you just simply translate your object, you can actually cancel out your transforms or whatever settings that they are by clicking on the label. So this is great. We had this before, but it was like reset all of TX, TY, TZ. Now it's individual. A little bit more control. Of course, that works with multiple objects too. So, all right. Next, over here we have our primitive types. I don't need to go too far into these. Cylinders, cones, all that stuff. Just to show you snapping, which I think I've shown you before in previous videos, but it's a little bit different now. Works basically the same. You hold S, you activate a start point, and you drag it to an end point, and you release. That's it. So over here in Tools, new and delete work. Save and load do not, but they will probably in the next video. We have a few other things over here. Marquee select, which is a much needed, very common feature. It works exactly as you'd expect. B activates it, and you can pretty much select, and you'll select items based on their origin. So you'll have to make sure you capture the origin, which is pink, until it's highlighted. So that works with Shift, so you can Shift marquee select as well. Of course, when you point snap, you can do, it does your whole selection. So that's kind of nice to mention as well. Rotating is basically there's no gizmo anymore, by the way. As you notice, there's no like actual gizmo handle that you grab and move around the scene. Everything is essentially hotkey driven and context driven. So W, E, and R will activate move, rotate, scale. As you can see here, we have this orange line showing you where you were, and the green circle is simply a drop shadow that shows you this is where your object was if it was on the ground. So if the sun was at noon, 12 o'clock, that would be a drop shadow. So just a thing to assist your eyes in knowing what's going on. Rotating, like I said, works that way, and then scaling is R, and so you can scale things that way. Before I jump down to modify, let me talk about constraints. So before, we had a gizmo, so when you move something, you'd grab X or Y or Z, and you would move it on that axis. So the way this works now is you would select your objects, you would activate transform, and then you would hit X for X, you'd hit Z for Z, and you hit Y for up and down. So that's pretty much how that works now. It's far more efficient. Once you get used to hotkeys, it's a very fast way to work. Also, if you have move active and you hold Control and Shift and then hit Y, for example, you're actually going to be moving it on X and Z. You're going to be turning off Y. You'll see down here in the bottom left under toggles we have our constraints. And so these things will change based on your hotkeys. So this is very useful. So you have all of your transform constraints you could possibly need access to. It's much faster and it's a little bit more efficient, and it's way easier to program, by the way, too. So all good things all around there. Let's talk about parenting and hierarchies a little bit. That's been improved a lot as well. You also see this orange dot that keeps floating around the scene. The orange dot represents your active object, which is your last selected object. And the way parenting works now is you have multiple objects selected, and whatever is your active object, when you hit P on the keyboard, everything that you have selected gets parented to the active object. And once you do this, you can move things around and translate and scale to your heart's content. By the way, scaling works with the axis constraints as well, very easily. They all do. So very useful stuff there. And so when you duplicate items, which is the thing that we've had before, it's just a little bit more robust now. You can duplicate within hierarchies. You can parent across hierarchies, and so you can build entire trees of nodes very quickly. Now it will start to get a little sluggish if you get too crazy. I don't recommend doing anything like this unless you really need to for some reason. There's not too many reasons why you would need to do this, but you can, and as you can see in the outliner here, it definitely can handle it as well. This outliner will just continue to come out until it fills up your screen if you go that far with it. So currently there's no limitations with depth. I'm sure you would run into problems eventually, so I don't recommend it, but yeah, the option's there, and you can do some cool stuff with this. Like for example, if I select all of these objects and I rotate on X, maybe Z, you can do some really crazy stuff. Of course, there's no animation. This is bugging out, so again, don't recommend it. But you can. There's no animation control for stuff like that. It's pretty much just for fun. So, anyways, moving on. Let me show you why that marquee is nice. You can delete all those objects. And we can center this back out, and then we can put it at 200. Let's do 400. So another feature that's also not quite finished yet, but I'm going to go and show you anyways, is the symmetry. It doesn't quite work as it should. Let's keep one cube. So first, let's say you want to duplicate something from this side and put it on the other side. Mirror it, essentially. We have this thing called duplicate mirror, which will do just that, although as you notice it didn't quite work as it should, and that's because I think X and Z are swapped or something. So duplicate mirror, yeah, there we go. So you can see it jumps across to the side. So if I will translate these, whoops, turn that back off. If I put these over here, now we're to duplicate, I bet it'll be X actually that it needs now. Okay, weird. Like I said, still a work in progress. So okay, those are swapped, but basically you can build yourself some symmetry aligned objects pretty quickly by just having one and then duplicating the rest. Another feature that's not also finished, but if you simply have symmetry enabled and you move and you have two objects selected and you have symmetry enabled for some axis, you hit W, you're going to get a symmetry transform instead of a regular transform. This isn't quite working as I want it to, but you get the idea. If this is off, you're going to move it standard. If this is on, you're going to move it with symmetry. So some cool features there. I think we're just about at the end of time, and I think we've also covered just about the main points. So another thing to note, this is the last thing, cube. So let's say you are translating a cube and you want to go into hull mode and start working on the hulls. If you hit Control Tab, it's going to cancel your transform so that you're not still in transform mode. Also, once you're in hull mode, you can't select objects anymore. Your entire system is focused on selecting and interacting with hulls, which of course I don't have any hulls in here yet, but next video you'll probably see hulls and maybe picks, and you'll see how those are going to work and interchange. And so yeah, lots of exciting things coming down the road with that. And that's GeoPix 1.0 in its current state. Things are feeling good, and I appreciate your time and thanks for watching. So I'll keep you guys posted and yeah, stay tuned for the next video.